All right. Hi. I think we've started. I don't know. I was told I was going to get a countdown and I didn't hear anything. I am Clar Rosso. I am the CEO of ISC Squared. We are the world's largest nonprofit association of cybersecurity professionals, certified cybersecurity professionals. We have more than 165,000 members, hopefully some of you in the audience, and in 175 countries. We are most well known for CISSP. It is our mission as an organization to inspire a safe and secure cyber world. And we do that by working with businesses and governments to understand their requirements to ensure the security of their information and systems. And then through education, assessment, and verification of experience, we take people on a certification journey. We also do professional development once somebody's earned their certification. We are a global advocate for ethical best practices within cybersecurity. And then we also are a massive advocate for growth of the profession, which fits very nicely into what I'm here to talk to you today about. My presentation is called Igniting a Movement, Strategies to Foster Inclusion at Any Stage of Your Career. And if I've learned anything in my DEI journey, and especially my global DEI journey, it's that when you throw a word out there like inclusion, you need to level set what you're talking about. So here is my kind of dictionary version of inclusion, and then I'll give you my Clar Rosso version of inclusion. So inclusion is about authentically bringing traditionally excluded individuals and or groups into processes, activities, and decision-making in a way that shares power and ensures equal access to opportunities and resources. All right, so if we think about that in the workplace, it's really about making sure everybody has a seat at the table, everybody's voice is heard, that you are doing that in an authentic way. So with that, and with the idea of authenticity in mind, I told you who I was, but I didn't really. I just told you what I do. So I'm going to just take a moment and actually tell you who I am. So this is me. I am pretty much since birth a fiercely independent individual who is also a champion of people. And I did not want to be a princess when I grew up, and I apologize, but I did not want to be a cybersecurity professional either. I wanted to be the first female Major League Baseball player, or the first female president of the United States. I guess that one's still up for grabs. And my greatest unfilled ambition in my life is to dunk a basketball on a regulation court. Also, and I guess the reason I picked this picture is I do love my food. And anyone who knows me has to find out early that I am one of 5 children. I have 4 brothers. We are 5 kids in 5 years. And when we were growing up, it was, let's say, a feisty environment to be kind. Lots of yelling, lots of arguing, lots of fun. We are fiercely loyal to each other to this day. We are each other's greatest enemies and biggest allies and biggest champions. But being a part of this fivesome has made me who I am. Now, of course, my greatest joy in life are these 2 characters. These are my sons, because I am a mom, and that is a huge part of who I am. And really, they're not so little anymore. They're 21 and 22. Really, if I think about my greatest accomplishment in life, it's nothing I've done in the workforce. It is being their mom and doing and seeing these wonderful young men grow up. And I had a little guilt when I was putting this slide in there because I didn't include my husband. So I do have one more slide with my husband in it. That's me in the middle, and that's my best friend from college. That was a just post everybody's vaccinated kayaking trip not so long ago. My husband is a wonderful dad. He's a high school teacher. Actually was a stay-at-home dad for 5 years. So when I think about my career success, I owe a lot to him. And then one last slide about me, and we are going to move on. These are my top values, and they're values that I got out of the VIA values assessment. If you haven't done it, you should actually try it. But they resonate with me when I did this. They, since childhood probably, and this is about fairness, honesty, humor, I love a good laugh, love, which I think is an okay word to use in the workplace, and courage. So that, if I were to tell you who I am, now you know what I do and you know who I am. So where I'm coming from as I give this presentation. All right, so we're talking about creating inclusivity in the workplace. Well, anytime you're trying to create change anywhere, you need to understand the environment you're working in. So at ISC Square, we help contribute to that by doing research. And the probably best known research we have is our annual workforce study, which actually just released on Tuesday. And in this workforce study, what we found was that the supply of cybersecurity professionals, so the profession, has grown by 700,000 individuals over the past year, which is fantastic, right? And the gap, so the unfilled demand for cybersecurity professionals globally, has decreased a little bit by about 400,000 down to 2.7 million. But that's a lot of unfilled roles. And even though we've increased supply and we've shrunk the demand a little bit, we really are nowhere close to out of the woods. In fact, globally, when we look at this, we see that the demand, so unfilled demand for cybersecurity professionals globally, has grown everywhere across the globe except in Asia. And the reason it shrunk in Asia, which still has a 1.4 million gap, is that Singapore, Japan, Australia had really concerted efforts by their government to increase their cybersecurity workforce. And also the economic impact of the pandemic was such that it shrunk the number of businesses that actually exist anymore to hire individuals. So effectively, we need to grow the cybersecurity workforce by 65% in order to defend organizations' critical assets. So where does this all lead into talking about inclusivity in the workplace? Well, you can't talk about the workforce gap without talking about addressing diversity. We know that we cannot continue to recruit only a single profile of individual into the profession if we want to shrink that workforce gap. We need to be looking at diversity in terms of gender, people of color, individuals with greater diversity of educational experience, background, and neurodiversity. We need to really look holistically at who we are attracting into the profession. And this is a little bit of my not as great news, but I have some encouraging news coming up. So when we talked about growing the workforce by 700,000 last year, you would have hoped that we would have seen an increase in the percentage of women in the profession, but we did not. It remained flat at 25%. So we need to understand that dynamic if we want to change it. And one of the ways we do it is we look at the trends in the data. So what we're seeing that's interesting and might help us moving forward is we're seeing more women come into the profession from areas outside of IT. So only 38% of the women coming into the profession are coming from IT backgrounds. We're seeing that women tend to pursue education, meaning college degrees first before entering the profession. And we are also seeing more women who are likely to explore the possibility of a cybersecurity career on their own compared to their male counterparts. So that helps us understand a little bit what we're looking at. This next slide is also very interesting. We're finding that the male-female ratio is changing as we look at people who are younger that are entering the profession. So for cybersecurity professionals under 35, 40% are women. That is good news. And you can see the number reduces as time goes on, which is probably a little bit both an indication of history as well as an indication of sometimes we're very successful in attracting people into the profession, but maybe not so good about retaining them, which is why we need to be talking about inclusivity. All right, so diversity, equity, and inclusion, they are key to closing the workforce gap and reducing the frequency and the magnitude of cyber attacks. And I want to be able to provide you some tangible ways to develop and foster a culture of inclusion in your workplace, no matter what role you're in. And we want to do this in a way that amplifies the success of women in cybersecurity and allows women to succeed and ultimately attract more women into the profession. So I'm going to share with you today 4 ways, not 5, not 10, not 3, but 4 ways to ignite an inclusive workplace. And this is what they are. 1, we need to tackle bias. 2, we need to embrace a mentoring mindset. 3, we need to model, and again, no matter where you are in your organization, we need to model inclusive leadership. And number 4 is we need to lift as we climb. And I'll dive into each one of those. So also, while a professional association like ISC Squared and businesses generally have an important accountability in driving change, I want to reinforce, and I'll probably do about 10 more times before I'm done, that each of us as individuals wield tremendous power to drive change. You can make a difference. And again, let me share some examples of what things you might do. So the first thing we need to do, we have to tackle bias. We have to start talking about bias. We have to understand what bias is and how it's showing up in the workplace, because we all have bias. It is how we make sense of the universe. I don't know what that number is. Is it 11 billion bits of information coming at us at all times? But we have to organize that and create systems of thinking that help us understand the world. And unfortunately, what happens is sometimes we create ways of thinking that create stereotypes or prejudice that make us create judgments in favor or against a thing, a person, a group, as compared to another one. And again, it's a way for us to make sense of the universe, but bias gets in the way of many of the things we're trying to accomplish, and it especially gets in the way of achieving diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace. So we need to understand what it is, and we need to have conversations about it. So let's take a look at this, and I'm going to share some incredible resources. I think you can see behind me my deck of cards, 50 Ways to Fight Bias. It's actually from Lean In. The cards you have to pay for, I think I paid about $30 for them. But digitally, you can download all of this. These next couple of slides I actually got from the 50 Ways to Fight Bias website. And they're really good because, again, definitions matter, common understanding of what we're talking about, and understanding what bias is helps us to then identify ways that we can address it. So some common biases that women face in the workplace: likability bias, performance bias, maternal bias, attribution bias, affinity bias, and intersectionality. And I can let you read this later, and I'm actually going to give you 2 specific examples. But let's just take one, affinity bias, because this shows up a lot in the workplace. And women, we do this as much as men do this, right? But we need to know it and understand it. So affinity bias is what it sounds like. It's we gravitate toward people who are like ourselves in appearance, in beliefs, and background. And it may also show up as us disliking people who are not like us. When we did our DEI global research, we conducted focus groups around the globe. It was going to be really curious, what were the universal diversity barriers that we saw in the cybersecurity profession? Your gender was one, but not even in every country did gender come up as the top barrier. And then there were a lot of differences between countries, but universally across the globe, education and experience walked away as two big diversity barriers within the cybersecurity profession. And that to me speaks to this affinity bias, likability bias. It's this age-old thing that a man is expected to be assertive. And so when he behaves that way, people think that's natural. When a woman behaves in an assertive way, she's called aggressive. And people like her less as a result. I'm not going to go through all these. I'm going to let you come back. You'll get a copy of the slides so you can read them. But it's important to understand what biases are in order to take action about them. So this also comes from Lean In. It's two great samples we're going to walk through of things that happen at work, why it matters, and what you can do about it. So you're in a meeting and a woman colleague is spoken over or interrupted. Why does this matter? Well, if women aren't heard, anybody isn't heard in the workplace. It can be harder to have them perceived as key contributors. That harms their career progression opportunities. And here's another thing we know, and diverse teams perform better. There's actually research that shows that diverse teams and diverse organizations perform better than their homogeneous counterparts. And in cybersecurity, we are dealing with dynamic threat vectors all the time. And so the more diversity on our teams, the better we're going to get to solutions. So this has happened. What do you do about it that is not the old Clar Rosso response of saying, hey, you just spoke over Naya, don't do that? Not everyone probably wants to take that approach, and I can tell you from experience, it's not always well received. So here's some suggestions of what you could do, maybe a little more subtly than the way I did it, but I'd like to hear the rest of what Naya thinks. I would like, Yolanda just raised an important point. I'd like to consider it further before we move on, right? So those are some tactics you can use. Even better, if you're the facilitator of the meeting, set the expectation up front that everybody's going to have a voice in this meeting. I'm going to go around the room now and ask everybody what they think. I'm going to go around the Zoom screen and ask everybody what they think. Or something else I've learned during the pandemic is facilitators will have, all right, we want everybody's reaction to this. We want you to type it in the chat box, but don't hit send until I say, so that everybody's ideas all pop up at the same time. It's a nice equalizer. But there are ways to constructively address these issues that help increase the level of inclusivity in your workplace and reduce the bias. All right, so here's another one. This goes back to that maternal bias. So someone suggests that a woman on your team be given a big high-profile project and a colleague says, I don't think this is a good time for her. She just had a baby. If your organization wants to retain and promote talented women, sidelining them, even if your intentions are good, works against the goal, that goal, by denying them opportunities that can lead to advancement. I've seen this so many times, and I see it in job interviews as well, where people sort of jump to conclusions about what somebody wants or doesn't want. So I always ask, have you asked them what they think about that? And again, the recommendation here was remind your colleague that this could be a career-changing project for whoever gets it. So it's better to let the new mom decide for herself whether or not she wants to take it on. Again, just like a subtle way to deal with that, that can really change that feeling of inclusivity in your business and reduce the bias. So let's talk about a couple more ways that you can reduce bias in the workplace. Create spaces for all voices to be heard, right? People talk about psychological safety. Maybe you've read or seen Amy Edmondson. She talks about this a lot. But how do you make it safe for everyone to speak up? I love that Zoom idea where everybody types in the chat, because it's sort of, it's a nice equalizer, right? Adopt blind hiring practices. So I have a friend. My friend's name, when I met her, all I knew her name to be is Ty. My friend's name that she was born with is Taisha. She thinks that got in the way of job opportunities for her. So she has 3 daughters, and these are their names: Tyler, Kyle, and Adrian. And they are all written in a way so they're kind of gender neutral. And she did that very specifically, so no one would have a bias about, oh, I should be hiring a male for this job, or a female, or I don't want to hire that person because they're a female. So blind hiring practices can include stripping resumes of names. It can even make names, where they live, even maybe what school they went to try to like assess people based on their skills and accomplishments only. We also find that it's really important to write job descriptions using neutral language. The best way I can talk about job descriptions is if they are too precise. We find that minority groups are far more likely to not apply for jobs unless they qualify for all the requirements of the job, as opposed to generally it's thought to be males who'll see, oh, I have one of those qualifications, I'll do that. I actually have to say I have that problem too. I say, oh, I have that qualification, I can apply for that job, right? I thought I could be president of the United States. I still think I could be president of the United States. So try to write job descriptions that talk broadly about what the job responsibilities are, so that people can look at those and say, yeah, I probably can do that. We probably have a little education to do on the job seeker side as well, to encourage them to apply for certain kinds of jobs. And then the other thing is focus on achievements, and this is going to feed into my next slide, but focus on achievements and measurable improvement during performance reviews. The more you can use SMART goals and make things measurable and not squishy and qualitative during performance reviews, the better off we are, because your biases get tapped down a little bit there. And because often performance reviews help drive who gets promoted within an organization. So what are some unbiased promotion practices? And at ISC Square, we're actually in the process of documenting our promotion practices to make them fair and equitable. Establish clear documented criteria for promotions. Make decisions based on data and metrics. Eliminate self-assessments or minimize the weight it carries. And this just goes to, there is research, there is data that says that women are harder on themselves when doing evaluations than men are. And if that's factoring into whether or not somebody gets promoted, it's creating an artificial barrier. And then finally, a recommendation for me, have a promotion review committee. Have a heterogeneous group look at the promotion recommendations and make decisions about them. Because if you're grounded in understanding your bias, you can call each other out and help each other through that process. All right, so what's our next area? Embracing a mentorship mindset. Our research has found that women who have access to mentorship report feeling valued in their role and are more likely to be successful. And in a field that lacks a standard progressive path for new hires, having a mentor is key to learning how things work in an organization. These are some quotes from a study we did this spring of people pursuing cybersecurity careers, as well as people who were in their first 3 years in cybersecurity roles. And we tried to unpack the value of mentorship for those professionals. And they say that having a mentor to shadow and rely on for guidance in their first 3 years in the field was invaluable for their success. And in fact, these people in the first 3 years of their jobs, they listed mentorship as one of the top 5 most important keys to cybersecurity success. But what we learned in our workforce study that just came out is that many people lack mentorship opportunities, and women in particular. Lots of organizations don't have formal mentorship programs, but we're going to fix that. Not fix that by creating formal mentorship I have an alternative. And that's really common across all areas, that there's not these formal programs. So what can we do about that? So I could give you the Gandhi quote that says, "Be the change you wish to see in the world," but instead, I'm going to give you my favorite quote of all time in the workplace is, "If they don't give you a seat at the table, bring a folding chair." So if you don't have a formal mentorship program in your organization, start an informal mentorship program. You know what? Maybe you're not doing it for a group. Maybe you just want to do it for yourself. Do a DIY mentorship. I guess what I wanted to say is I am a product of DIY mentorship. I've never been a part of a formal mentorship program. But on the other hand, I would tell you I have dozens of mentors. And those mentors are very diverse. And this is how I did it. So if you're interested in informal mentorship, it really is about starting with curiosity. Want to learn about people, what makes them tick, how they do things. If you see somebody who did something that you just think was brilliant, go ask them about that. Ask them about what their thought process was. Maybe you want to know how somebody got to where they are in their career. Sit down, ask them questions. Also, mentors are great for bouncing ideas off of. So if you have a challenge and you want somebody else's opinion, go ask a peer. Ask somebody that sits next to you, somebody who's senior to you, somebody maybe even that's junior to you or outside your circle of work entirely. But really be curious. Ask people all around you at all levels. That was my point of direction unknown. It's okay to be vulnerable. I once have shown you a picture of me embracing a cake, apparently at my first birthday party. It's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to tell people I need help. I'm not quite sure what to do here. So do it. And it's also okay to ask somebody and be all right with the fact that they may say no. So if you want to ask somebody to spend 15 minutes with you to talk to you, the worst they can do is say no. And I'll tell you, in this world of remote work, I find the willingness and ease of catching a 15-minute virtual coffee with someone greatly improved than it was pre-pandemic when we were all in the offices. I would give this other piece of advice is have questions ready. Sometimes people will enter a mentorship relationship and say, come sit down, tell me everything you know. That's not really the way it works. You really should, if you're looking to work with a mentor, come to them with curiosity and questions. All right, model inclusive leadership. So what is that about? They talk about one bad seed can create a totally toxic company culture, and that it takes multiple loud voices to generate positive change. Well, be a part of generating positive change in your organization. Set the example, and you can do that from wherever you are in an organization. So what does it actually take then to become an inclusive leader? Here are some thoughts. You have to be willing to be vulnerable. Nobody's perfect. None of us are perfect. And if you are perfect, people are going to be less likely to want to approach you. So nothing makes you approachable like being imperfect. I remember when I entered the workforce, I am early Gen X, and I entered the workforce full of baby boomers and my parents' generation. And there seemed to be like this way that you acted when you became a leader. It's kind of like I used to think there was a way you became once you became an adult. And I never quite got that. Like, and I couldn't do it. I couldn't figure out how to do that. I couldn't figure out how not to be authentic and be myself. So be willing to be vulnerable. It's good to laugh at yourself. It's okay if other people laugh at you from time to time. You need to check your own biases. The worst thing you can do is think, I'm fully woke. I have no biases. No, we all have biases. Check your biases, talk about them, especially when you're engaging in practices that could be creating barriers to inclusivity. So when you're recruiting people for jobs, when you're analyzing those people to decide who moves on, when you are talking about promoting people, when you're inviting people to meetings, when you're deciding who you're going to give a project to, think about what you've learned about bias and is that showing up, and then taking corrective action on that. If you want to be an inclusive leader, you got to hear the good, the bad, and the ugly about what you are as a leader. So seek feedback. Find your truth tellers. Find the people who will tell it to you like it is. I know who those people are for me. I bet you know who they are for you. It's sometimes hard. I remember a guy I used to work with who was one of my directors when I was a chief operating officer. And we had just done his performance review. And at the end of it, I said, okay, Matt, give it to me. What feedback do you have for me? And at this point, like I'm the whopping, I don't know, I might have been 40. He's probably like barely 30. And he looks at me and he says, Claire, you are out of your mind. Like, I'm going to tell you everything that's wrong with you. But I have learned, so I get that, right? That may not be natural, but I have learned how to find truth speakers and go talk to those people who will tell me what I need to hear, not what I want to hear. Also really important to being an inclusive leader is encouraging your team members' personal and professional growth. People want to be, if we're talking about creating an environment that's authentic and where people can be themselves, then they need to know that you value that authentic self and who they are. So talk to your team members about what their personal goals are, where their professional goals are, and how you can help them achieve that in the workplace. I talked about this a little bit earlier, but nurture psychological safety. Don't make somebody regret being vulnerable with you. You really need to make it safe for people to share information with you, even if it shocks you, right? Make it safe for people, because if you respond poorly to somebody being vulnerable with you, chances are they won't do it again. And then my last one here, which we're going to go into in depth starting on the next slide, is implement inclusive meeting practices. So let's talk about that. So if you're not that person who's going to go get your folding chair and drag it up and say, I want to be in this meeting, and that's okay. You can do that. I used to go ask, I moved from working at a state-based organization where I was the chief operating officer. I ran that $30 million business to being part of a global organization where I was running a bigger book of business, about 80 million. But I was finding I was not invited to all the kinds of meetings that I thought I should have a voice in. So I just went and asked to be invited. And that is perfectly legitimate. Again, the worst thing anyone can say to you is no. But if you're if you're not in that situation, there's other ways that you could create meeting inclusivity. So this like cute little picture off to the side, this is actually something at my last job that we used about good like hosting and facilitating inclusive meetings. And so these are a couple of the ideas. So make people aware of the meeting in advance, talk about what the purpose of it is, what the outcomes you're trying to achieve, and what the agenda is. And that is really important so that if people see that, they can understand, is this something I want to hear about? Is this something I have an opinion about? And it gives them a chance to prepare. And that's really important for some people. Some people are really good off the cuff. Not everyone is. All right. Make sure that you have the right information available before the meeting and the right people in the meeting. Start and end the meeting on time. Have ground rules for the meeting. I have some ground rules on my next slide. Make sure that discussion is focused on what you're there to accomplish. And make sure everybody has a voice. Go around the room, ask for everybody's opinion. Have a meeting recap. I think I have this coming later on. I was going to talk about another one of my books up here, this red one, Creativity Inc. But make sure everyone has a voice. I'm going to actually suggest this. So when you're trying to give everyone a voice, you know, going around the Zoom, everybody talks. Actually, the idea of this from the guy that's the head of Pixar, he said, have a round table, don't have a square table. Because if you have a round table, nobody's at a position of power in the room. Something to think about. And then recap the meeting as well. All right. So, and then when you have that inclusive meeting and you're getting all the voices and all that great input, make sure you have established meeting ground rules, and these can differ for everybody, but it's, you know, things like practice generous assumptions. If somebody says you do something you don't like, don't automatically assume they're saying it to make you angry. Like say, okay, they might have, let me get curious about that and find out why they said that. Make sure everyone gets a voice. I think I've now said that about 10 times. So if nothing else, you're going to come away from inclusivity, make sure everyone gets a voice. All right, level the playing field. Oh, that was my prompt for the round table. But again, the round table, go around the room asking for everybody's opinion. Don't, if you are the leader, do not state your opinion first. Wait till you hear other opinions. And you don't have to validate people's opinions. You can say thank you. Don't every time pass a judgment on an opinion someone gives. Just, you know, nod and say thank you. Like people actually seeing that you're listening makes a huge difference in somebody feeling like they belong to part of the group. And then if you are working in a virtual environment, use technology, use the raise your hand function, applaud people when you hear a good idea, right? Use and leverage that technology. It's there for a reason. All right, so our last one that we're going to talk about before I move to questions is this idea of lifting as you climb. And that is, there isn't any successful person out there who can truly claim that they've achieved success without the help of others. At all stages of our career, we rely on others and we can bring others along with us. So here are some ideas of things you need to do to be an inclusive leader. So this is what lifting in action looks like. All right. Celebrate successes. When somebody does something great, tell them that and congratulate them on something they did that is great. There's some tools out there. We used to have this thing, I think it's called, I don't know what it's called. It used to be called You Earned It, where it was like a social site where you could give people points and write something nice about the great things that they did, but celebrate successes. Offer to help somebody who's struggling. Display gratitude. Thank people, and if you can and they're willing, thank them publicly for the great work that they did. That acknowledgement, again, adds to the sense of belonging and also helps position people for future success. And then create opportunities for people invite somebody to that meeting that they wouldn't normally be a part of so that they can learn something new. Take a chance and put somebody on a project that maybe it would be easier to put the more seasoned individual on, but create opportunities as you grow. In our DEI research that we did, this quote that I have on the screen really stood out to me. It says, I've been in meetings where people have used my words, they've used my strategy, they've taken my work and they've presented it as their own. They get credit for my talent. It would bum me out so bad, but I didn't really have anyone to lean on. There is so much to unpack there, but that is like, I don't have anyone I can talk to when something goes wrong. But if you see that kind of behavior happening in the workplace, say something about it. Say, wow, you know, that's interesting that you said that, because I just heard Samantha say that like 10 minutes ago. I think that's really similar to what Samantha said. Samantha, would you tell us more what you were talking about earlier? Nice ways to do it. Do it in a genuine way. Don't be passive aggressive, but really nice to do it. Or you could just yell at them, but really not advised. Okay, next slide. So a few more thoughts on lifting in action, and then we are about done, and I'm going to take some questions. So how can you lift others and help create that inclusive environment? Encourage each other. Be each other's champions. I had a colleague once who said, and this was my first time being on an executive team, and I was 35 years old, and I just had been given a division directorship, I guess. And he said, you know what, we need to stand for each other's greatness. How awesome is that? Stand for each other's greatness. So encourage each other. And if you are a leader, let people shine. Let your team shine on its own. You don't need all the glory. Let your teammates present and speak up. Give them opportunities. Always be looking for those opportunities to let your team shine. You're still a good leader. You're a better leader if you do that. Give recognition, give official recognition. So if you have all hands meetings, you have team meetings, you send out notes to your team every week, recognize people for the great work they're doing. People like to hear that. Create opportunities for we're here talking about women. Create opportunities for the women on your team to be visible in front of leadership. Yes, of course you could give that presentation to the executive team or the board, but you know what? Why not let that woman on your team who worked really hard on that project do that? And advocate for others. Not everyone has the same level of courage. Advocate for others as you move along. All right, so I have two final thoughts. When I used to be in an office, I'd have like little quotes up on the wall all around me, and so this is one thing I love. Some of this may seem super easy for many of you, a slam dunk. Others, some of it, maybe you're out of your mind, I'm never going to do that. So this is inspiration for me from Eleanor Roosevelt. Do one thing every day that scares you. And when we're trying to create an inclusive environment in the workplace, it's going to be hard. It's going to require some difficult conversations at times. Do it anyway. All right. And then my last quote is from Amanda Gorman, and the poem that she gave at earlier this year at the US inauguration. There is always light if only we're brave enough to see it. If only we're brave enough to be it. And I know you are brave enough to create that inclusive environment in the cybersecurity profession. And I thank you in advance for doing it. We have some resources on the ISC Squared website that you can use. And with that, I'm going to stop and take a couple questions. Oh my goodness, there's lots of chats. I don't even know where to go to look for the questions I'm going to say. Anybody have questions? Somebody liked the bring your own chair. There's apparently another session later today that's called What Recruiters Don't Tell You, How to Negotiate an Offer. I think that looks fabulous. I would say in that kind of light, when you're negotiating, You know that advice that you give your friend? That remember that advice you give your friends and take that for yourself, right? I do that all the time. I say, when I'm in a quandary, I say, oh, what should I do? What should I do? And I think, well, if I were advising someone else, what would I tell them to do? And so that's take that advice that you're giving your girlfriends. What are the top 2 questions when seeking someone out as a mentor? That's a great question. So I'm not sure if that's the top 2 questions that you would ask a mentor or something that you look for. So I'm going to start with something you look for. So one of the things we learned in our research, and I'll say it for me personally, is that people want a mentor generally, the kind of safety spot to start is someone that they feel some level of connection with. So it could be, if you're a woman, it could be having a woman as a mentor. If you were a rhetoric major in college, like I was, it could be finding another rhetoric major, which actually is possible, even though it seems impossible. But people like some level of connection. But it really has to be someone that you feel comfortable with. That is one of the first things to do. For me, one of the other driving factors in selecting a mentor is somebody who knows something that I don't know, because that's where it's all that curiosity thing where I can learn something new. So that I think is really important in terms of what to look for when looking for a mentor. Any advice on how to engage overworked, burnt out employees in DEI work? Okay, that's an awesome question. This is what I did at ISC Squared, and it's what I did at my last job. Is I talked about the importance of DEI. I talked about the importance of it for our profession, and I also talked about the importance of it within ISC Squared. And then I just asked for people, I said, if you want to be a part of this, if you'd like to be a DEI champion within our organization, let me know. We're not going to ask you to do a heavy lift. Let me know. So I actually got, I think we figured it was 15% of the organization volunteered to be DEI champions. And what their commitment is 1 hour once a month. That's all we're asking for them. We do an early morning so that we can get people around the globe in the call, 1 hour once a month. And then what we find from that champion group is they show up if they can. And then if there's something extra to do, I get volunteers. So if you make it small, manageable chunks, people are more likely to volunteer. All right. How can someone transition into a DEI role? What skills should they have? That is a fantastic question. I'm thinking about somebody I know who transitioned into a DEI role. I think people moving into DEI roles come from all sorts of different backgrounds. The one person I'm thinking about, she came from a communications background, so she was used to working with people. I'm trying to think of all the things that make her so strong. She has a strong curiosity and interest of learning about DEI and facilitating conversations with people. So if you are somebody that likes to work with people, has strong curiosity, which everybody in the cybersecurity space really seems to have, those are some of the ways that you might move into a DEI role. All right. Well, I think we are at the end of our time. I appreciate so much you having me here with you today. And I want to thank you for all the wonderful work that you do. I've been only working with the cybersecurity community for just over a year. And I am beyond inspired by all the people that I've met in this space. And thanks for your time today.